Hello everyone. Welcome back to my series. Today, we continue to follow the turbulent journey of singlemomlife Hoài, a strong woman who now faces unexpected twists of fate. As you all know, in the previous episode, Hung's mother, in an attempt to escape her crimes after being hunted by the police, jumped into the freezing river in the dead of night. Days later, a woman's body was found drifting ashore. This news made everyone believe the story had come to an end, but the truth is far from over. Fortunately, or perhaps frighteningly, that body wasn't Hung's mother. She miraculously survived, clinging to rotting logs along the riverbank to escape death. From that moment on, she became like a living shadow, hiding in the darkness, consumed by an unrelenting hatred for Hoài. Meanwhile, Hoài remains completely unaware of all this. She continues to quietly care for Hung, who is lying in the hospital, his health deteriorating day by day. But little does she know, just as she's struggling to hold herself together, another storm is silently closing in. With cold, piercing eyes and a twisted mind, Hung's mother has returned to the old house. She stalks Hoài every move, observing her habits like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Each passing day feeds her obsession, and her hatred slowly transforms into dangerous schemes. So, what will happen when this darkness suddenly descends upon Hoài? If Hung learns the truth, will he be able to reach her in time? And as for Hung's mother, after everything that's happened, is there still a path for her to turn back? Or will she drag everyone down with her into the abyss of vengeance? Stay tuned, because in today's episode, the secrets will finally begin to unravel. And believe me, what's about to happen will leave you breathless until the very last second. After those breathless, heart-pounding moments of facing the corpse that had been pulled from the riverbank, Hung could barely stand. The world spun around him, the voices of the people nearby seemed distant, as if echoing from another world. His heart raced uncontrollably, his hands were icy cold, and his legs felt as if they could no longer support him. In that brief instant, he truly believed he was about to face the greatest pain of his life, the loss of the only mother he had. But then, when the police officer spoke the words, "The victim is not your mother," Hung froze in disbelief. For a moment, he couldn't process it. Then suddenly, he exhaled deeply, as if an enormous weight had been lifted off his chest. His knees buckled, his entire body went limp, exhausted, yet overwhelmed with indescribable relief. And yet, within his eyes lingered a faint shadow of unease, a gnawing fear that this was merely the calm before the storm. On the drive home, Hung said nothing. He gripped the wheel in silence, his mind a tangled mess. The scenery outside blurred into vague streaks of color, while in his head, the image of his mother remained painfully vivid. He didn't know whether to feel joy or sorrow. Joy, because his mother wasn't the one who had been claimed by that cold, merciless river, but sorrow, because it also meant she was still out there somewhere, hiding like a ghost from a past that refused to rest. The moment he stepped into the house, Hung immediately sought out Hoài. She was the only person he could lean on right now. Seeing him walk in, worn out and heavy-hearted, but with a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes, Hoài face filled with worry. "The body, it wasn't my mother, Hoài," Hung said hoarsely, his voice trembling as if he had just awakened from a nightmare. "I know. I can feel it. She's still out there. She hasn't left me." Hoài didn't respond right away. Instead, she quietly stepped closer and took his hand in hers. Her touch was warm, steady, a comforting anchor in the middle of his storm. She looked into his eyes, her voice calm but resolute. "I believe that too. If your mother is still alive, then one day, she'll come back. And when that day comes, the truth will finally be revealed. Hung, don't let fear drown you." Hearing her words, Hung closed his eyes, letting the warmth in his chest spread slowly. It was a small, fragile hope, but it was enough to keep him from feeling alone. He looked out the window. The sky outside was still heavy and gray, storm clouds looming, but somewhere within the darkness, he thought he saw a faint glimmer of light. "If she's still alive," Hung whispered, his voice hoarse but determined. "I just hope that after everything, she'll finally understand what's right and what's wrong. I just hope she'll find the courage to turn herself in. So that all of this can finally end." As his voice trailed off, he tightened his grip on Hoi's hand, clinging to that last fragile piece of faith. Hoi only nodded silently. In her deep, unwavering gaze, beyond her trust in Hung, there was also a quiet fear. She knew all too well, if Hung's mother was still alive, the real storm had yet to come. And when it did, it would drag them all into an unforgiving whirlwind they could not escape. In that moment of silence, neither of them spoke another word. Only the sound of rain tapping against the window filled the room, like a relentless drumbeat, warning of the tempest still waiting ahead. In the days following the incident at the riverbank, Hung gradually felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He no longer lived under the suffocating weight of guilt and fear that once consumed him. Thanks to his relentless efforts, he had managed to pay off a large portion of the crushing debt that had plagued him for so long. It was as if the invisible chains that had bound him were finally broken, leaving behind a space of quiet relief he hadn't felt in years. Life slowly began to feel peaceful again. The days of living in constant anxiety, hiding from prying eyes and whispered gossip, were finally fading into the past. For the first time in a long while, Hung felt as though he could truly smile. And then, when things had finally started to settle, Hung turned to Hoica. His gaze was softer now, his voice warmer than it had been during the storms they had weathered together. "Hoica. I think it's time. You can go back to your home now. You don't have to hide anymore. We've suffered enough, it's time for us to live like normal people again." Those words made Hoica freeze. She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes blurring with emotions that had been buried deep inside her. She could hardly believe that this day had finally come, the day she could return to that house, the place filled with countless memories, but also the place she had once been too afraid to face. "Really, Hung?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded gently, smiling, a rare smile that Hoica hadn't seen in what felt like forever. When the day came for Hoica to return to her old home, everything was still the same, the familiar walls, the scent of wood, and the windows that welcomed the sunlight just as they always had. But unlike before, her heart no longer carried that lingering dread. Instead, it was filled with a simple, quiet happiness she once thought she'd never feel again. That evening, as Hoica prepared a small meal for Hung and Tony, she silently prayed in her heart. She prayed that Hung would remain safe after all the trials he had endured. She prayed that Tony would grow up in a home free from shadows. And above all, she prayed for Hung's mother, the woman still hiding somewhere out there, to one day find peace and the courage to turn herself in. "Please, give her a chance," she whispered inwardly. "A chance to be forgiven, a chance to surrender, a chance to end this life of running." Though she never said those words aloud, Hung could see them in her gentle eyes. Without speaking, he reached out and held her hand, as if to say he shared the same hope. Because no matter how dark the past had been, they both still believed that one day, redemption would come, and a broken family might finally find a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. After a long period of pushing himself to the limit to pay off his debts, Hung felt like a machine running far beyond its capacity. Months of relentless pressure, compounded by the ordeal with his mother, who had both fled and disappeared, had weighed heavily on both his mind and body. Though he tried to act strong in front of Hoài, deep down, Hùng knew his body was slowly giving out. The heart pains he had once been able to manage began to return. At first, they were just fleeting stabs, but soon they became more frequent and intense, each one feeling like an invisible hand squeezing his chest. Hùng told no one, not even Hoài. He didn't want her to worry, didn't want to burden her with more sorrow when she had only just begun to enjoy a fragile moment of peace. One morning, after a sleepless night battling the relentless chest pain, Hùng decided to go to the hospital for a checkup. He didn't want to face the truth, but deep inside, something told him his condition was no longer something he could ignore. When the doctor reviewed the results, his expression grew grave. His voice dropped, firm and unwavering. "Hùng, your heart condition has worsened. If you don't get admitted for immediate treatment, you could be in serious danger at any moment." Hùng froze. He sat in silence, his hands unconsciously gripping the fabric of his pants. In his mind, images of Hoài and Tony, those he loved most, flashed before him. But almost instinctively, he shook his head. "Doctor, I can't be hospitalized. I still have so much to do. I can't." The doctor interrupted, his tone sharp, leaving no room for argument. "Hùng, this isn't a choice. You must be admitted. Otherwise, the consequences will be unpredictable." In the end, faced with the doctor's unyielding insistence, Hùng reluctantly agreed. But he made one condition: no one was to tell Hoài. He couldn't bear to see her worried face, couldn't bring himself to shatter the fragile peace she had finally found after everything they'd been through. The days Hùng spent in the hospital dragged on painfully slow. He kept everything hidden, enduring the pain and the lonely, sterile nights in silence. His phone was still on, but every time Hoài texted or called, his replies were brief and vague. "I'm busy with some things. Don't worry." Hoài had no idea. She simply assumed Hùng was buried in work, that the aftermath of his mother's disappearance had left him with more to handle than usual. She reassured herself with those thoughts, but deep down, an unshakable unease gnawed at her. Every night, she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Sometimes, she picked up her phone, wanting to call him one more time, but stopped, afraid she'd be bothering him. Still, her heart wouldn't stop whispering, something wasn't right. And then, on a stormy night, as she sat by the window staring out into the darkness, she murmured softly, "Hùng, where are you? Why can't I shake this worry?" Little did she know, somewhere else, Hùng was lying in a stark white hospital room, staring at the ceiling, hiding everything, and silently praying he'd have the strength to hold on, just long enough to see her again. After miraculously escaping death in the freezing river, Hung's mother drifted to a remote borderland. In the beginning, she lived like a shadow, hiding from every gaze, running away even from the blood-stained past she herself had created. But instead of remorse, instead of finding the slightest trace of peace in her soul, her heart harbored only one thing: hatred. Every night, in the shabby tent she called home in that unfamiliar land, she stared up at the ceiling as memories of Hoài came rushing back like knives cutting deep into her mind. In her eyes, Hoài was the root of everything. If not for Hoài, her son would never have turned his back on her. If not for Hoài, she would not have been reduced to a fugitive, living like a ghost outside the bounds of the law. She clenched her teeth so hard that her gums bled, her eyes bloodshot, hatred rising in waves like a raging fire. Those who happened to meet her gaze could not help but shudder. Hoài, this is all your fault. You destroyed my life. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. There was no turning back. At this point, even if she surrendered herself, it would all end in the darkness of a cold prison cell. And for someone pushed this far, there was only one belief left to cling to: revenge. She began to plan. No longer did she intend to flee across the border as before. Instead, she sought every way possible to slip back into the city, the place where Hoài and Hùng were desperately trying to rebuild a peaceful life. But she would not return as a mother, nor as a fugitive. She would return as a phantom, driven by the desire to spread chaos one last time. On rainy nights, she walked silently down dimly lit streets, a hood pulled tightly over her head, avoiding every pair of eyes. Her face was gaunt, but her gaze burned with malice. Inside her, there was only one goal left: to destroy Hoài. As long as I still breathe, you will never know peace, Hoài. And so, while Hoài and Hùng remained lost in the illusion of calm days, somewhere far away, a true storm was brewing. A storm named Hung's mother, fueled by a hatred that could never be extinguished. After secretly returning to the city, Hung's mother moved like a shadow hidden in the darkness. She was no longer the woman once known as the mother of a brilliant police officer, but now merely a fugitive consumed by hatred. In her mind, only one name echoed endlessly: Hoài. She made her way back to Hoài old house, convinced that one day, the girl would return there. Every step was cautious, calculated, like a predator stalking its prey in the night. Standing in front of that familiar house, a flood of memories came rushing back: every confrontation, every moment Hung stood between her and Hoài, and the instant she was forced to flee, becoming an outcast shunned by the world. "It's you. It's all because of you," she muttered under her breath, her hoarse voice sounding as though it rose from the depths of an abyss. From that day on, Hung's mother began her relentless watch. She hid in the dark corners near the house, observing every window, listening for the faintest sound. Whenever a figure passed by, she held her breath, heart pounding wildly, hoping it would be Hoài. But day after day, the house remained silent. No sound of a door opening. No familiar footsteps. Only the wind sweeping through withered trees and the dim streetlights casting their pale glow on her gaunt face. Her patience began to wither away. The hatred that had already corroded her mind was now driven to madness by the endless waiting. Clutching the edge of her coat with trembling hands, she whispered to herself, "I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. You won't escape me, Hoài. Not ever." But what she didn't know was that Hoài no longer lived there. She had moved in with Ha, a safer place, far away from the haunting shadows of the past. This left Hung's mother's plan in limbo. Yet still, she refused to give up. Night after night, her silhouette lingered in that deserted street corner, patient and unyielding, like a trap set in the dark. Her eyes no longer held a trace of life, only one thing still burned fiercely within them: a hatred that could never be extinguished. And that very hatred was the harbinger of a nightmare soon to descend upon Hoài. After days of trying to reach Hung with no response, Hoài felt as if she were sitting on a bed of burning coals. Sleepless nights tormented her, each moment heavy with dread. Images of Hung haunted her mind: his weary eyes, his frail figure worn down by debt, and the unhealed wounds of his heart after so many ordeals. Had he collapsed somewhere from exhaustion? Or worse, had something terrible happened to him? Finally, unable to endure the silence any longer, Hoài decided to return to their old house. It was a place filled with painful memories, but it was also the only place where she might find a clue about Hung's whereabouts. That day, the sky mirrored her mood, gloomy and oppressive. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and cold wind howled through the empty streets, making the entire neighborhood feel lifeless. Each step Hoài took was heavy, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. When she reached the rusted iron gate, she drew in a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage before stepping inside. But Hoài didn't know, in the shadows beneath the porch, a pair of eyes had been watching her for days. Red with sleeplessness, hollow as an abyss, those eyes belonged to Hung's mother. She had returned, silent and relentless, like a nightmare reborn. For days, she had hidden there, waiting for this very moment, when Hoài would appear so she could unleash all her hatred. And now, that moment had come. As Hoài stepped into the yard, the air seemed to grow heavier, an ominous stillness settling around her. Suddenly, from the darkness, Hung's mother lunged forward like a wild beast long restrained. She grabbed Hoài hair and yanked so hard that Hoài nearly fell. What are you doing?" Hoài screamed, her voice trembling, eyes wide in terror. But there was no answer. Instead, a twisted, dry laugh cut through the air, sharp and inhuman. "You! It's all because of you, Hoài. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be living like a hunted dog." The woman's bony but unyielding fingers tightened their grip, pulling harder, as though she wanted to rip Hoài apart strand by strand. Hoài struggled frantically, clawing at the sinewy arm, but it was useless. Her body trembled, her breath hitched in her throat, it felt as though she were being dragged into an endless abyss. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, slamming a door against the frame with a metallic clang that echoed into the silence. The creaking roof and rattling tin sheets screamed like knives scraping against her ears. In that frozen moment, there was nothing else, only Hoài and those burning, hate-filled eyes of Hung's mother. Let me go." Hoài cried out, her voice breaking, eyes brimming with fear. But instead of releasing her, Hung's mother drew her face closer, her breath hot and venomous against Hoài skin. "You will pay. For everything I lost. You will pay." Hoài body shuddered violently. Her knees buckled, her trembling hands clawed at the doorframe, but she had no strength left to resist. In that moment, she realized, this wasn't just a threat. Hung's mother had come to destroy her. And in sheer desperation, Hoài screamed for help. Inside the old, silent house, the darkness seemed to swallow everything whole. The sound of wind whistling through the cracks, the creaking door banging against the wall, and Hoài ragged breathing merged into a chilling symphony. She stood there, trembling, her eyes wide with terror as she faced Hung's mother, a woman she never imagined she would encounter again under such horrifying circumstances. The older woman's eyes burned red, veins of hatred etched deep from years of living in hiding. In that moment, Hoài could feel an icy dread radiating from her, as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, one misstep away from plunging into oblivion. The tension was suffocating, making even the act of breathing feel heavy. Hoài tried to stay calm, but her hands clenched tightly without her realizing, fear gnawing at her from the inside. Meanwhile, Hung's mother never looked away. Each step she took was slow but deliberate, predatory, like a beast ready to pounce on its helpless prey. Elsewhere, Hung lay unconscious in his hospital bed, unaware of the nightmare unfolding. If he knew that, at this very moment, his mother stood before Hoài with eyes full of vengeance, could his fragile heart withstand the shock? And even if he could, would he make it in time before everything spiraled out of control? What will happen next? Will Hung's mother truly strike at Hoài? Or will someone appear to shatter this dreadful standoff? And Hung, weak and bedridden, can he still become her protector? Find out in the next part tomorrow, where the truth may change everything.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Thì Mình vừa mới hoàn thành xong phần mới nhất của video Lý Tự Diệp. Ở chỗ mình bây giờ thì khá là khuya rồi, và mọi người có thể thấy là trời đang rất là yên tĩnh, chỉ có tiếng chó sủa thôi. Mình vừa mới hoàn thành xong video đây. Bây giờ thì mình đang xuất ra và mình sẽ đăng lên. Mình sẽ đăng vào khung giờ 7 giờ sáng theo giờ Việt Nam. Thì bây giờ các bạn nó rơi vào tầm khoảng 7-8 giờ tối ấy. Thì mình hy vọng là video của mình sẽ được mọi người yêu quý và ủng hộ nhiều hơn. Đó sẽ là một cái động lực rất lớn để mình có thể dành thời gian và tâm huyết hơn để làm ra những video và những nội dung hay hơn để gửi đến mọi người. Và nếu như mọi người yêu quý kênh mình cũng như là yêu quý các nhân vật thì đừng quên ấn like và subscribe kênh nhé. Và nếu như mà có ý kiến đóng góp hay là những lời chúc tốt đẹp hay là chúc phúc đến các nhân vật thì mọi người có thể để lại ở phần bình luận. Và hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo. Bye bye.